Hi everyone, I'm going to talk today about the uniqueness of a woman, a biblical perspective. Before I go in depth into the topic, I want to talk about what was the purpose behind God creating a woman. Now, we all know that all of us are created with purpose, but there was a specific purpose for God creating a woman. If you look at Genesis 2, that's the chapter where God creates a woman. But in Genesis chapter 2, verse 18, he says, "It is not good for man to be alone. I will make him a helper suitable for him." If you fast forward to Genesis chapter 2, verse 20, it says, "But for Adam there was not found a helper suitable for him." Now, just remember, this is a time when God created the heavens and the earth. He created all the animals, the birds of the air, the fish of the sea. And it was now Adam's responsibility to name all of these creatures, and Adam was doing that. Adam didn't feel the need for a helpmate. God saw the need for Adam to have a helpmate, and he saw that all of the creation that he made was not good enough to be a helpmate for Adam. And then in verse 22 and 23, God fashions a woman out of the side of Adam and gives her to him as a suitable helpmate. Now, remember that this is also the time when Adam was walking with God. He technically had everything he needed. He was walking with the Lord. He was walking in intimate relationship with him. But even in the midst of that, God saw that it was not good for man to be alone, and that's when he created a woman. And the purpose for creating a woman was that she is a helpmate, a support system for Adam. Now, somehow, we unfortunately think that being a support means you're not being a leader, or we somehow mistake being submissive or submitting to being subdued. There's a very, very, very big difference. And the Bible, I love the Bible. It's just so full of stories of people living lives the way God wanted them to live, but also of stories of people making mistakes and messing up, but God creating a message out of their messes. So if you think about this, woman was created in a supporting role, and her responsibility was to help Adam. That was her role. Now, the Bible, like I said, is full of examples, and we'll talk about those examples of women in these roles. And all of the women that the Bible highlights, I'm telling you, are strong, independent women. All of them broke gender stereotypes. And what's amazing is that Jesus himself broke gender stereotypes when it came to women. And we'll talk a little bit about that. So what I want you to understand at the onset is that when God created woman, the characteristics he gave her were very, very unique. They were specific to women. And when you read through the Bible, the way God used women was so unique. It was like God using unique people for unique purposes. And we'll get into that as well. But as I was saying, I want to establish up front that when God created unique genders, male and female, he wasn't necessarily setting a specific gender role. Now, I think what happens is we are so caught up in trying to compete with men that we don't embrace being a woman. What? I mean, men and women are so different. Of course, there are common points, but in essence, they were created differently for different purposes. And I think you live your best life yet when you fulfill God's purposes. So, like I was saying, women were created to be a helper, a support system to Adam. Now, there is a difference between being a support system and being subdued and lowly and being dismissed. Unfortunately, we think that that to be a support means we don't have value, but that's not the case at all. Now, I know that the minute you talk about women, we end up talking about Ephesians chapter 5, where it says, wives, submit to your husbands. Absolutely. I know we are called to submit to our husbands, but we miss the portion where it says, but husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. Now, personally, I believe that God has a soft corner for women. I feel like we're all daddy's little girls. Because if you think about it, the hard job is the man's in this case. Can you imagine can you imagine having to love someone as Christ loved the church? I mean, that is a tall order. If you think about it, if a man is able to love a woman as Christ loved the church, the woman will not think twice before submitting to her husband. It's a natural response. You and I submit to Christ because of how immensely He loves us. So even there you see that the tall order is for man. And that doesn't mean that women don't have a big calling. Of course they do. But what I want to encourage you through this session is for you to understand that God's idea of a support system is so much more than what you and I perceive being a support system. Now, I work in South Sudan and I work as a communications manager. My role is a very support role. I am not front and center. I am not on the front lines. I am in a position of leadership. Yes, I am in a manager capacity, but I don't run the company. I am not on the field doing the actual work, but the work that I do is essential. I tell the stories of all the people who are working on the front lines. I get to communicate with our donors on the kind of work we're doing here, which brings funding into the organization. I get to encourage people by telling their humanitarian aid stories. And I think about this sometimes. I think about, if I didn't do my job, would those in the front lines be able to do their job? And I think that's what we forget as women when we are in that support role. Our calling is higher because we are being the backbone for we're being the backbone for people who are working, not people, for men and our husbands who are working front and center, who are on the front lines. Their calling is very different. Our calling is very different. And I think it's about time we embrace that calling instead of thinking, oh, if I'm being called to a support role, then maybe I'm not valued enough. But actually, if you think about it, and if you look through the Bible, and actually we'll see some of those stories, God has such a special heart for women. First, I'll start off by, as we continue through the session, I will be quoting a lot of scripture, so I may not actually be reading them out, but I will quote them. So my encouragement to you is to quickly jot down the passage, and you can meditate on that at a later time. So I want to highlight this one portion. The Bible speaks very, very highly of women, and it says in Proverbs 31, I'll break that down for us. This is a conversation between a mother and her son. The queen is talking to King Lemuel, and she's telling him about the characteristics of a wife. And she starts off by saying, an excellent wife who can find, and goes on to to give characteristics of a woman that makes her excellent. Now, I like that this passage it talks about being an excellent wife, which is the support role, which God created, the helpmate. Uh, Support doesn't mean lower. Support means like your backbone is holding your entire posture. If you hurt your backbone, if you hurt your back, if you hurt your spine, you're rendered useless. So please be remembering that you, a woman in a support role, is the strength behind a man. It is that strength that makes and allows for the man to serve God as God's calling him to do. So we're looking at Proverbs chapter 31. For the first, so some of the characteristics I'm going to be reading from my laptop, which is why I'll be looking that side. So look with me through Proverbs chapter 31. First off, it says, an excellent woman, a woman of noble character, is trustworthy. The heart of her husband trusts in her, and he will have no lack of gain. Why will he not have a lack of gain? Because the woman is trustworthy. She is intentional. She does good and not evil all the days of her life. She's hardworking. She looks for wool and flax and works with her hands in delight. She's like merchant ship. She brings her food from afar. Women are hardworking. Another characteristic of an excellent woman, an excellent wife, is that she is caring and kind. She rises also while it is still night and gives food to her husband and portions to her maidens. She stretches out her hands to the distaff, and her hands grasp the spindle. She extends her hand to the poor, and she stretches out her hand to the needy. Another characteristic, she is resourceful and she is independent. She considers a field and buys it. From her earnings, she plants a vineyard. She makes linen garments and sells them and supplies belts to the tradesmen. An excellent woman is strong. She girds herself with strength and makes her arms strong. She senses that her gain is good. Her lamp does not go out at night. She is prepared and equipped. She is not afraid of the snow for her household. For all her household are clothed with scarlet. She makes coverings for herself. Her clothing is fine linen and purple. She is distinguished. Her husband is known in the gates when he sits among the elders of the land. Why is he known in that area? Because of the kind of wife that she is. She walks with God. I think this is the best thing. I love this. She walks with God. Strength and dignity are her clothing, and she smiles at the future. She opens her mouth in wisdom, and the teaching of kindness is on her tongue. She looks well to the ways of her husband and does not eat the bread of idleness. Her children rise up and bless her, her husband also, and he praises her, saying, many daughters have done nobly, but you excel them all. Charm is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman who fears the Lord, she shall be praised. I love that the Bible actually expands this out. Sometimes we get so caught up on the things that the woman in this passage is doing. Like she's waking up early, or she's taking care of her kids, she's making clothes and linen. We get stuck on the things that she's doing that we forget the characteristics that this passage is portraying to us about what makes a woman excellent. And that's what you and I are called to be. We're called to be excellent. And if you see in this entire passage, it's talking about a woman being an entrepreneur. She is a businesswoman. Like she sees gain and she makes the most of it. She is very entrepreneurial. She is resourceful. She's independent. She's strong. Her husband depends on her. Her children depend on her. Women as women, we are created in such a way that we want to be needed. And let's be real, men need us. So I also want to talk a little bit about Jesus' heart for women. When I was a teenager, I used to always say to my mentor, Uncle, there are no role models in the church. Why everyone's so disappointing? And he would look at me and he would often say, Rachel, your role model should not be a person. Your role model should be Jesus Christ. So in any situation that I am, I really genuinely ask myself, what would Jesus do? And recently I was doing a talk in my organization about gender-based violence, and I was talking about how Jesus perceived women. And I knew that Jesus always had a soft corner for women, and I knew that God used women. Like we'll get to that, but it just amazes me. But seeing that, it reminds me that you and I, we're not just women. We are daughters of the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, and He treats us that way. You and I were Daddy's little girl. So look with me in John chapter 2, verses 1 to 11. This is the story of Jesus turning water into wine. This is the first miracle that Jesus did. And He did this miracle out of respect and honor for His mother, a woman. Jesus treated women with respect and love, and He couldn't say no to His mom either. Look with me at two passages, Luke chapter 21 verses 1 to 4, and then Luke chapter 8 verses 43 to 48. Now these are two women in the Bible who come from, who are in a very vulnerable position, but Jesus noticed them. The first passage which I said, Matthew 28 verses 1 to 4, this talks about the woman who was at the temple and she gave 2 copper coins. That's it, that's all she had. And yes, we look at her heart, we look, when we read that story, we're focused on she gave with all her heart, she gave what she had, which is all true. But then I look at it from Jesus's perspective. Jesus noticed her. I mean, this temple was booming with people. There were people coming in for sacrifices. There were trade people selling goats and doves, and there were beggars and people screaming and moms running after children and dads taking their kids into the temple. It was a busy, busy, busy place. But in the midst of all of that, this one woman, and the Bible identifies her as being a widow. And I would often think, how did the Bible know that she was a widow? And I've come to realize that in olden times, they had very, very specific attires to wear that would identify them as a widow. And Jesus had a heart for them. In fact, the entire Bible, if you look through it, I'm amazed at God's heart for women, and in this respect, for widows. It doesn't say the same thing about widowers, but for women and widows, it says, take care of the widows and the orphans, and God has such a heart for them. But I digress. So in this story, we're looking, Jesus notices this widow, this woman, amidst this entire crowd. He takes note of her and he acknowledges what she is doing. Nobody else can see what she's doing. Nobody else cares about what she's doing, but Jesus notices. Sometimes as women, we think that what we're doing is not valuable, that nobody sees us. It's very easy for us to fall into the shadows. But the amazing thing about Jesus is that he looks in the shadows. You and I, we will never lose, we can never run from his notice. How do we know this? Next passage, Luke chapter 8 verses 43 to 47. This is the story about the woman who was bleeding for 12 years. 12 long years. She was in pain, she was in agony, she was ostracized by the community. How do we know that she was ostracized? Well, the book of Leviticus is very, very detailed about how to, um, what to do when you are bleeding, and it talks at length about you can't be around people, you can't go to the temple, you can't touch people, and there were so many restrictions. And this woman lived with these restrictions for 12 years. And finally one day she said, I've had it. I need to be healed. I want to be healed. And she goes and touches the hem of Jesus's clothes. And and by touching that, she gets healed. She gets healed because of her immense faith. Now, I love verse 47. So prior to verse 47, Jesus knows that someone touched her, and he's in the middle, touched him, sorry. He's in the middle of a massive crowd. And while he's there, he looks at his disciples and says, someone touched me. I felt my power go out. And everyone is standing there thinking, you're in the middle of a crowd. There is no social distancing going on here. How can you just say someone touched you? Everybody's touching you. And I can almost imagine this woman trying to hide herself. I mean, she had to hide herself, one, because if people knew that she was bleeding and that she was outside of her house, she could easily be stoned. And imagine she's bleeding, which means she also must be smelling. I mean, the smell of dried blood, you and I know how that smells. When Bakrid happens, the smell of blood is very distinct. You can't run away from it. And this woman has been bleeding for 12 years. Of course she's going to hide from the crowd. Of course she's going to do things in hiding. But Jesus refused to let her be in that place of hiding. And I love verse 47 where it says, actually I'm going to read that out. So I'm reading Luke chapter 8, Matthew, Mark, Luke. Okay. So, Luke chapter 8, verse 47. Okay. So this is what it says. When the woman saw that she had not escaped notice. I love that. Because it shows me that she was trying to hide from people. She was trying, even though she was healed, she was still living in that stigma. Of course, you don't expect it to go away immediately. But Jesus wanted to restore her physically, but he also wanted to restore her in front of all of these people. So when she stood up and she said, yes, I was the one who touched your hem, Jesus took notice of her, and he told everybody that she had immense faith. That's how deeply Jesus cares about women. Some of the women the Bible highlights are such strong women, and it's amazing to me to see how God used women. We'll look at some examples. Look with me in 1 Kings chapter 5. This is the story of Naaman. Now this man was a powerful man. He had everything he ever could want. He had power, prestige, wealth. He had servants on his right and his left. But he had leprosy. And the one who helped him was a little girl. And what she did may seem insignificant. And maybe to her it felt insignificant. I mean, think about it. She's a little servant girl, and she goes to her master's wife and says there's this man somewhere out there, go meet him, he can heal her. He can heal Naaman. A little girl. I mean, in those days, it was servants didn't talk to their masters, but she had the audacity, like in the best way possible, to go and talk to to her master's wife. But also think about what that says about the little girl. What kind of a life she must have been living for her master's wife to trust what she was saying and go and tell her husband. A little girl changed the life of a commander of armies. Then you look at the story of Judges. If you look at not the story of Judges, look in Judges chapter 4, verses 4 to 10. This is the story of Deborah the prophetess. This woman led 10,000 people, led an army of 10,000 soldiers alongside Barak, and they fought against the Canaanites. And she goes on to say, "Listen, Barak, I'll go with you. We will fight. We will fight the Canaanite king, but the victory will not be yours. The victory will be credited to a woman." Now, tell me, do you see that God is not a respecter of gender roles? Do you understand what I'm saying? I mean, in our heads, we have these specific roles. These are only things that women can do. These are only things that men can do. Yes, there are some of those, but let's not limit God on how he would use you and me as a woman. So in this case, Deborah leads, not just goes. She was not one among the 10,000. She led alongside Barak these 10,000 men and went to war. Now, the woman who claimed victory for Israel was a woman named Jael. And I'm telling you, she's amazing. She defeated the commander of the Canaanite army, Sisera, by, get this, she took a tent keg. A tent keg is like this big nail. She took this nail, took a hammer, and drove it into his temple. I mean, what? I mean, you don't expect that from a woman, right? In our minds, a woman is supposed to be dainty and graceful, and she is for the most part. But we also know that while a woman is dainty and graceful and lovely and wonderful, she can totally drill a nail into a man's skull. I love that the Bible puts that example in there. So don't limit yourself to how God can use you. Then you look at the story of Abigail in 1 Samuel chapter 25. Now, in this story, David and his men are in the wilderness and they're taking care of all of these. They're sort of providing protection to the shepherds in the area. And they realize that there's this man whose name is Nabal, and all of these shepherds in that area are actually his shepherds. And because of the protection that David and his army was providing for them, none of the sheep got lost. And so he decides that he was going to go to Nabal and ask for supplies. Long story short, Nabal decides that he wants to be foolish, and he rejects them and says, "I'm not going to give you squat, just no." But Abigail, she had immense discernment, and she immediately packed 200 loaves of bread and a lot of supplies and sent food to David and his army, and meets David, confronts him and says to him, "I'm sorry about my husband, please accept this gift." And because of what Abigail did, Nabal was saved. Then you look at the story of these two women, Shipra and Pua. They're not talked about often, but they played such a crucial role in the life of Moses. Do you know who these two people were? Look with me in Exodus chapter 1, verses 15 to 21. In this passage, you see that these two women were midwives. They were nurses. Their job, they were tasked by the king, to kill Hebrew male babies. And instead of doing that, they risked their lives, they risked their profession, they risked their families, and saved the lives of several Hebrew boys, one of whom was Moses. God could have used anybody else, but he chose these two women. Then you continue into the New Testament. There's Lydia, who was a businesswoman. There was Phoebe, who served the church, and she helped so many people. There was Tryphena, Tryphosa, Persis, and Priscilla, who worked very hard in the Lord. There was Lois and Eunice, who brought Timothy up in faith. And then you look at Mary, the mother of Jesus. God used a woman to bring salvation to all of mankind. Now, think about this. If Jesus was born through Joseph, if a man got pregnant, people would not have had any problems whatsoever believing that he was the Messiah. But that would be God breaking the law. But Jesus didn't come to break the law. He came to fulfill the law. And he used a woman to do what only a woman could do, give birth. And if you see the entire life of Jesus, Joseph was mentioned. Please don't get me wrong. I'm not taking away. I'm not diminishing the role of Joseph in Jesus's life. I'm not trying to do that. And in this entire session, I'm not trying to diminish the value of a man. No, I am, however, trying to help you see the value of a woman and the value in being a woman and how unique it is. And the kind of things that you and I experience as women is very unique to us as women. Mary had the amazing opportunity to not just bring Jesus into the world, but to also raise him up, to raise him to be this amazing person. Because I know that we focus on Jesus being all God, but he was also all man, which meant he needed to be nurtured. And Mary nurtured him. There are a few other women that I want to talk about. I don't have too much time, but I'm going to go over this. We end up setting specific roles to women. And I think that's a very unfortunate thing to do. Clearly, we've seen that God doesn't put a limit on how he wants to use women. So I don't think you and I should either. But one of the things that I really love about women in the Bible is that Jesus and God uses women to be missionaries. He uses them for missions. How do we know this? Look at the Samaritan woman. If you look at John chapter 4, verses 28 and 29, in that passage, Jesus and the disciples go to the well, to Samaria. They sit at the well. Jesus is sitting there. The disciples go to get food. And when they come back, the disciples are amazed. It says they were surprised to see that Jesus was talking to a woman. They're not surprised that he is sitting at the well. They're not surprised that he is talking to a Samaritan. They're surprised that he is talking to a woman. But here's the amazing thing. Jesus just raises her value with this amazing, intense task of sharing the good news of him being the Christ to everyone else. Up until then, all of the miracles that he did, he told the people, don't tell this to anybody. Don't tell anyone. You know, when Jesus healed the leper, he said to him, go show yourself to the priest, but don't tell anybody. Like, keep this to yourself. But when the Samaritan woman came into the picture, she went and told the entire town, the entire city, come and listen to this man who told me everything that I ever did. Jesus spoke to her with love and conviction, and she ended up being the first missionary, the first evangelist. Then fast forward to when Jesus died. At the cross was Mary, the mother of Jesus, and there were a few other women there. But the first person to have seen him come back to life was Mary. And this is in John chapter 20, verses 11 to 18. Mary is at the gravesite and she thinks that Jesus is the gardener, and Jesus calls her by name and says, Mary, and she immediately recognizes him and says, Rabbi. And I love that Jesus tasks her, a woman, to run to his disciples and tell them that he has come back to life, that he was raised and the law is fulfilled, the promises are fulfilled. She ran to Peter, John, and all of the disciples, and she told them the good news. She was a missionary. She was an evangelist. She was in missions. Now, this is something that I was very fascinated about, and this is something that I actually genuinely, honestly only read it today. If you look with me, and this I'm going to read Luke chapter 8, verses 1 to 3. Now, I understand that as women, not just as women, all of us, not all of us can be missionaries. Not all of us can go out to places like South Sudan, or, just go out. I get that. But there were some women in the Bible who still participated in Jesus' ministry, and this is amazing. So we're looking at Luke chapter 8, verses 1 to 3. Soon afterwards, he began going around from one city and village to another, proclaiming and preaching the kingdom of God. The 12 were with him, and also some women who had been healed of evil spirits and sicknesses, Mary, who was called Magdalene, from whom 7 demons had gone out, and Joanna, the wife of Chuza, Herod's steward, and Susanna, and many others who were contributing to their support out of their private means. What does this mean? This means that these women financially supported Jesus' ministry. So, as women, let's not confine ourselves to specific roles. But let's also not try to do everything that let's not feel like we're competing with man or against men. No, we are uniquely created. We are. I'll tell you what I love about being a woman. I love that I'm loving and caring. I love that I'm dependable. I love that my friends need me, my loved ones need me. And I love that as women, you and I have the privilege of raising children, nurturing people. It's a very natural thing for us. We nurture our own children, we nurture our siblings, we nurture our friends, we nurture, I don't have kids, but I have my niece and nephews, and they are the apples of my eye. I would take a bullet for them. And I'm not saying that a man will not love that way, but I am saying that women are created uniquely. There are things that women can do. Women can multitask. Men can do one thing at a time. They can do it well, but they can do one thing at a time. We have so many amazing qualities. My encouragement to you this day is that you see for yourself, and I hope that in this session you were able to see for yourself the high value that Jesus, that God, the Bible places on women. We are created uniquely. We are created for a purpose. And when you live that purpose out and you live it with all of your heart, you will live your best life yet. You will stand as a role model for people. You will be the standard and you will be the example. You and I have so much power to influence people, influence young minds. And it's because of the way God created us. So yes, we should be treated equally to men. But don't make no mistake, we are very different. Let's embrace that difference. Jesus noticed these differences. The Bible clearly shows these differences. And I think those are to be celebrated. Remember, in Psalm 139, the Bible says, the psalmist says, Lord, I delight in you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. You knit my innermost being. That's what Jesus did. That's what God did with you and me. When he made us women, he didn't make us women by accident. He thought about it. He pondered about it. And he said, Rachel, now she's going to be a woman. She's going to be my little girl. So, Daddy's little girls, let's embrace it. Let's enjoy it. And let's remember that we are the daughters of the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. We are uniquely created. We are amazing and we are loved. We are strong and independent women. We have a calling. We have a purpose. Let's live it and live it well. Amen.